I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. And when it has gone past, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the fear has gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain. Frank Herbert, Dune. I wanted to publish this video with the video that I'm actually referring to as a part of it, but I think, for two reasons, that's not a great idea. One, it'll make this video even longer, and it's already about 20 minutes. And two, you can watch the video for yourselves. It's only like 5 minutes long, and it plays out exactly as one might guess that it would. So I'm going to leave a link in the description below because I'm not certain about, how YouTube feels about using someone else's content. But suffice to say this, my opinion. These guys are either very brave or very stupid. I would not have been the black guy that they got to walk around with an AR to show how there's a difference between how one group is treated versus another. There are many variables that could not really be taken into consideration. Principal among them being, what if the cops showed up and just shot? Like, one of the major issues with, social experiments like this one is we know for a fact that due to our perceptions, right or wrong, black is associated with negative emotions and black males are associated with a lot of negative emotions. One of the most dangerous being fear. Fear is extremely dangerous to play with as an emotion because fear causes people to activate their fight or flight responses. And when that occurs, you're truly no longer in your right mind. The following is a list of the physical and mental responses to the fight or flight response from Wikipedia. And I chose Wikipedia because it's easily accessible to everyone. You guys can check my work and look at it and be like, yeah, did he actually say it? So he did. So the first thing we're going to say is the acceleration of heart and lung action. So your heart begins to race in order to get large amounts of blood, which is now, freed, filled with newly liberated glycogen and fat stores to the muscles to be prepared to either fight for survival or flee, thus increasing your likelihood of survival. Your lungs begin ramping up respiration to ensure that the oxygen necessary to burn that newly freed cellular substrate is available. You have paling and flushing, or an alternating between both of those. In the case of paling, the blood is being shunted away from the surface of the skin to better prioritize the large muscle groups, and flushing is the opposite of that. And it's necessary because, once all that blood starts flowing through the interior of the body, it increases in body temperature and needs to remove that so that you don't get, overheated. Next up is the inhibition of your digestive action. So in your digestive action or intestinal action will slow down or stop. And this is due to constriction of non-essential internal blood vessels, thus prioritizing blood flow to the large muscle groups to better prepare them to fight or flee. There's a general effect on the sphincters of the body, and in general, they relax, which is why some people can throw up because, the esophageal sphincter can relax and thus allow food to come up and out. And also, you have some sphincters in the colon that can relax and cause people to lose control of their bowels just because they're afraid. You have constriction of blood vessels in many parts of the body. The body constricts blood supply to non-essential areas of the body, and this is partially why the digestive tract slows down. I discussed the liberation of metabolic energy sources, particularly fat and glycogen for muscular action. It's self-explanatory, but me having my little nutrition background, I want to talk about it anyway. So the body needs energy in order to fight or flee. So the liver begins breaking down its glycogen stores, which is the short-term stored form of glycogen for immediate energy, and as well as it also tells the body to start breaking down the triglycerides or body fat, which is our long-term energy storage, to ensure that the body will not run out of energy during this moment of greatest need. You have dilation of the blood vessels to the major muscles, and the major muscle groups. Blood vessel dilates so the nutrients and oxygen can pass through as uninhibited as possible, all while carrying off the metabolic waste, which would otherwise cause the body to become fatigued early. You have an inhibition of the lacrimal gland, which is responsible for tear production. You have, and that causes, dry eyes. You also end up with dry mouth, and that's likely a side effect of the shutting down of the digestive tract. You have a dilation of the pupil, meaning it gets wider. That's in response to the increased mental activity as the mind is whirling, trying to come up with a correct response to the task at hand. You have relaxation of the bladder, relaxation of the body sphincters. Again, cause people to pee on themselves because they're afraid. Um, you also have an inhibition of erection, which again, sphincters are relaxed, and that's you understand the science of how that works. And the body doesn't need to be focused on making more people when you might not survive the next 10 seconds. So another thing is the auditory exclusion, loss of hearing. And this is now thought to be caused by the rapid increase in blood flow and heart rate due to the stress response, which causes additional background noise, like pounding in your own ears, and the loss of visual cues, which results from the tunnel vision, which also occurs. And, tunnel vision, loss of peripheral vision. You have inhibition of spinal reflexes or shaking. These physical responses are designed to help you focus on dealing with the current threat at hand. The body has dedicated most of its resources towards getting you through this immediate threat, especially the tunnel vision and auditory exclusion. And while this is extremely useful in situations where it's warranted, on the battlefield, in the forest, or the plains where a human is surrounded by predators, you need to be on razor sharp, focused on figuring out that when that tiger leaps, you need to try and sidestep, thrust that sharpened stick that you have towards it so they can kill it and thus maybe survive. This hyper focus, deafness, and blindness suggests the threat is not so useful when one is expected to be policing. If all you're seeing is this potential threat, but you can no longer hear him or her explaining why he or she is not a threat, nor see anything other than what you have identified as a threat or target, or sometimes imagined to be a threat or target, and that's how people who are otherwise non-threats end up being treated as lethal threats. The second thing that occurs when the fight or flight response is activated is a mental response, and these include emotional regulation. And in the context of the fight or flight response, emotional regulation is used proactively to avoid threats or stress, or to control the level of emotional arousal. Your emotional reactivity. During the reaction, the intensity of the emotion that is brought on by the stimulus will also determine the nature and intensity of the behavioral response. Individuals with higher levels of emotional reactivity may be prone to anxiety and aggression, which illustrates the implications of appropriate emotional reaction in the fight or flight response. You have your cognitive components, and the specific components of cognitions in the fight or flight response seem to be largely negative. And by that I mean they tend to be characterized by attention to negative stimuli, the perception of ambiguous situations as negative, and the recurrence of recalling negative words. So all that means that the person that's going through their fight or flight response tends to only hear negative words that the other person says, i.e., I have a concealed carry permit and I'm also carrying a concealed handgun. But the person that's hearing that, who's already keyed up, only hears the word gun, fixates on that word and all of the negatives that that word is associated with. The fight or flight response person then perceives anything that's not 100% crystal clear as negative. And sometimes, depending on how swept up in the flow they are, they can still perceive a situation other people that are external to the situation perceive as clear. as negative because they are completely, out of their depth. There also may be specific negative thoughts associated with emotions commonly seen in the reaction. You have your perception of control. Your perceived control relates to an individual's thoughts about control over situations and events. Perceived control should be differentiated from actual control because an individual's beliefs about their abilities may not reflect their actual abilities. Therefore, overestimation or underestimation of perceived control can lead to anxiety and aggression. This is key because the perception of control, or the sense that one is losing control of a situation, absolutely explains how you can see a person go from 0 to 60 in a literal thousandth of a second if the person who is already reacting to their fight or flight response feels that they are behind the power curve and that they have to try and make up for lost time. This is why people tend to react with aggression, because the feeling of anxiety pushes in some people the need to be more aggressive in order to, one, push down their own anxiety, and two, to move forward in taking control of the situation. This can be useful, but only if one is not already out of their depth due to their physical responses sweeping through their system and pushing them. Social information processing. The social information processing model proposes a variety of factors that determine behavior in the context of social situations and pre existing thoughts. The attribution of hostility, especially in ambiguous situations, seems to be one of the most important cognitive factors associated with the fight or flight response because of its implications towards aggression. The important thing to take away from this is when you are afraid, you tend to perceive threats as threats and potential threats as threats and pre existing thoughts and biases on possible threats as threats. Basically, you're more inclined to view everything as hostile because your body is primed to view things that way in order to keep you alive, which again is extremely important if you're on a battlefield or fighting against the beast in the jungle, but not so much when you're dealing with an ordinary citizen on a normal routine encounter. So you can see how this is extremely dangerous for the people on the police side of the equation if that is how the law enforcement officers are viewing them. I'm reminded of a quote: "To a man with a hammer, every problem looks like a nail." So there's a difference, and there should be a difference and distinction between being a cop and being a soldier. Even back in the Middle Ages, we had city watchmen, and then you had the actual soldiers, knights or whatever, that did the war fighting. The reason that you have a difference is because soldiers shouldn't have to deal with policing and police shouldn't have to deal with soldiering. The reason being a soldier's enemy is a member of a separate group, usually, and some might say even preferably, of a different tribe, language, country of origin, ethnic group, uniform. It just makes it extremely easy to key up the fight or flight responses and then wade into the thick of battle, wreaking havoc and leaving smashed bodies in your wake. Because all the soldier has to do is attack anything that's different from him. So, with that being said, this is a problem in a place like, I don't know, America, because we have what we call the melting pot, where we have all these different ethnicities and people from different countries and different people with different accents, all under the same banner of American citizen. And if we activate that fight or flight response when dealing with the other as law enforcement, then that other tends to be anyone that's not a uniformed member of law enforcement. And that is a problem if we are going into that us versus them mindset, because all the citizens are now being viewed as potential threats by our citizen watchmen, our law enforcement officers. And they are afraid of us because we're being seen as potential threats, which cause them to activate that fight or flight response, which alters their mental state to the point where our lives can potentially hang in the balance. Because our law enforcement officers are all armed, which, according to my opinion, they should be. But unfortunately, most of them are not trained to the standards that we in some parts of the U.S. military train ourselves to. They don't train to our levels in the target discrimination category or the stress management levels, which would help mitigate those fight or flight responses. It is again for this reason that I feel that we should train our law enforcement officers to higher standards than they currently train to. Because a routine traffic stop shouldn't have you scared out of your wits because you don't know what I might do and you're unsure of what you'll be able to do in response to that. I used to tell my guys on the team the reason we train is because competence breeds confidence. So at this point in the discussion, we usually hear the whatabouts, principle among them being, but what about that madman who just wants to see the world burn? As you know, Batman Begins highlights, or whichever one of the Batmans that had Joker in it. Well, that guy is absolutely a threat. But law enforcement officers can't treat everyone like they're that guy because that doesn't help the citizens of this great nation have any faith in their protectors. When you treat everyone like they are the one in 1,000 madman to whom laws don't matter to anyway, then you're going to engender fear of the watchman into your citizenry, which is not the best of plans, in my humble opinion. So, to wrap up this super long video, law enforcement officers should not fear the citizens they are supposed to protect from the one in 1,000 madman. And, that ratio is probably a lot higher, maybe 1 in 10,000, even maybe 1 in 100,000. We can just say 1 in 1,000 for sake of argument. They can achieve this through a better selection process as well as more rigorous conflict resolution training, which would involve continuous jujitsu and hand-to-hand training as well as verbal conflict management. They should be masters of the spoken words. In other words, the negotiator, not the Delta Force operator. If one wants to be an operator, well, there's a path toward that goal, and it involves joining the Army or military, since everyone wants to have operators now. But that's a whole nother topic, which is off subject. Law enforcement officers are not soldiers, and their enemies are the rare wolves in sheep's clothing that they must protect all of us sheep or citizens from. In closing, I'm going to go ahead and throw out this little thought experiment. If you were a shepherd and your sheepdog was accidentally killing your sheep, what would you do to that dog? Would you honestly believe it was an accident after the 4th, 5th, 20th, 100th accidental mauling of your flock? Or would you assume that maybe your sheepdog might have a little too much aggression in him and he might either need to become a hunting dog or soldier, or, at the very least be punished and removed from sheep herding detail because he or she is now a hazard to your flock, in addition to those rare wolves that pop up every now and then. So think about that. The oppresso libere, and Rangers lead the way.